Hi, this is Mr. Evans. This video is going to focus on how to read a case study in paper 2, because that's really important to access high marks. Now, what I recommend my students do is to have a look at the questions before they actually read the case study, so they know what they're looking out for. So the first question about this case study here is about how mass customization benefits the shareholders of car manufacturers. So when we have a look at the case study, and you might just want to pause the video and read this in your own time, but we're looking at, so students have gone through, they've read the questions, they know it's about mass customization, and then they can pick out, okay, so there's some information about customization here that will probably be helpful. It says here about designing their own panels for the side of the car. Because I know what mass customization is, I know that that's going to be relevant. It says here the phrase customization, so I know that I'll be able to pull out information from these two paragraphs to help me answer this question here. And once I get onto answering this question, I would try and link mass customization to shareholders before I answered the question. The second question is about a significant increase in interest rates. It's not just an increase, it's a significant increase in interest rates on the profits of car manufacturers. So how do interest rates going to affect the profits of car manufacturers? Well, I know from reading the case study here, cars are a high value item. They're usually bought on credit, which is going to be relevant for interest rates. So because I know there's a question on interest rates coming up, this fact about them being expensive, bought on credit, that's going to be useful for when I answer that 9-mark question on interest rates. And again, I'd want to plan that question before I got started on it. The 16-mark evaluation question associated with this is that many car manufacturers are expected to respond to a fall in capacity utilization by cutting prices. The question is, to what extent is cutting prices a good way for any business to respond to a fall in the overall capacity utilization in its industry? It's quite a complex question there. So it's about businesses responding to overall capacity utilization, a fall in overall capacity utilization in its industry, i.e. it's not the only company that's facing a fall in capacity utilization, it's across the whole industry. And is cutting prices a good way to do that? Again, there's some information in the case study to help me. It says, wherever it says the key term, so capacity utilization, I know that there's going to be application for me. So we could use the fact that capacity utilization in the car industry is 78%. Commentators predict that's going to fall further in the next few years, and that some car manufacturers will respond to the situation by price cutting. Notice that we can use the information there, but AQA have bolded the word any. All right, so a good answer for this question isn't just going to focus on the car industry, it's going to focus on any business. What does the examiner's report say about this question? So the best answers relate back to capacity utilization throughout. This is a question about capacity utilization. They also recognise that a price cut may be good for businesses in some industry and not others, and in some cases students use examples of these businesses or types of businesses. In very good responses, students are able to consider an alternative to reducing the price and explain why this was better for certain businesses. But the focus of the responses remained very much on the effectiveness of a price cut. Remember, the question is cutting prices a good way for any business to respond to the overall fall in capacity utilization? You don't need to mention any other methods to respond to a fall in capacity utilization. You're just answering, is cutting prices a good way? But the examiner's report says, if you're saying that cutting prices isn't a good way for certain reasons, if you can offer an alternative and explain why it's better than price cutting, that's still answering the question. but the focus has to be on cutting prices. Better answers often noted the falling trend in global capacity utilization, i.e. they used the case study. Some students provided some good service sector examples of underused capacity, hotel rooms, airlines and train seats. So students are bringing in their own knowledge. Right, this provided good context. So when students didn't do so well, it's because they didn't have an understanding of capacity utilization and just focused on cutting price. They didn't tackle the broader issue of all businesses. Remember, AQA have written in bold here that it's any business that you need to answer on. Students frequently recognise that any reference to price cutting could bring in price elasticity of demand, but many were imprecise. So, any question that talked about price cutting, a good model to bring in is price elasticity of demand. So I've had a go at answering the question, and this is what I've come up with. So I've put this in red here. I've put it in red because you don't need to start with a definition, right? You really don't need to start with a definition, because if you're answering the question, you are going to explain what capacity utilization is in your answer. The only time that you put in a definition is if you were going to skip the question for some reason, and you know what capacity utilization is, but maybe you're going to skip the question, you just want to pick up a couple of marks. That is the only time that you'd write a definition. Otherwise, you get into it because you will explain to the examiner that you know what capacity utilization is through your essay. So I've got 3 paragraphs. The first one starts like this: cutting prices may be a good way for a business that experiences price elastic demand for their product to increase capacity utilization. So I start off by clearly signposting to the examiner that I'm answering the question, right? The question is about, is it a good way? All right, it might be a good way if a business experiences price elastic demand. Now I need to explain that. To increase capacity utilization, an organization needs to produce and therefore sell more units. If demand for a product is price elastic, consumers are highly responsive to changes in price. Therefore, a cut in price is likely to stimulate demand, and the business will need to increase output, leading to a rise in overall capacity utilization. So I've got a chain of argument there explaining why price elasticity of demand would be effective to increase capacity utilization. Now I'm going to do some application. As cars are a big ticket item that take up a large proportion of people's incomes, demand for cars is likely to be highly price elastic, and therefore cutting prices may be appropriate in this industry. Okay, so I'm using the case study, which is about the car industry. However, it should be noted that were all car companies in the industry to cut their prices, it may not lead to an increase in demand for any business. Therefore, the extent to which cutting prices is a good strategy to increase capacity utilization depends on how many other companies are doing the same. So it says here a fall in the overall capacity utilization in the industry. If everyone's doing it, if everyone's cutting prices, well, maybe it's not going to be so good. So I've ended by clearly linking to the question and saying what cutting prices depend on. If everyone's cutting prices, then no one gains an advantage and you're just in a price war. Demand for you isn't going to go up because everyone's doing the same thing. On the other hand, there are other ways to increase capacity utilization that may be effective for certain businesses. So I'm fully focused on capacity utilization. A car manufacturer like Jaguar may be reluctant to cut their prices because of the effect this could have on their brand image. Okay, so I'm still in the context of cars. A more appropriate strategy for a company with a premium product could be investment in innovation and differentiation, which could increase demand for a product, raising output and capacity utilization without tarnishing the company's reputation. So I've offered an alternative here in the context of companies with a premium product. Another alternative is to reduce the overall capacity by selling off unused assets, such as dormant factories, or reducing the size of the workforce. It could be an appropriate strategy for car manufacturers, because it seems that capacity utilisation is expected to fall across the industry. Reducing capacity would cut the costs and allow car manufacturers to focus on designing new environmentally friendly vehicles, and would therefore be a more effective long-run strategy than cutting prices. So I've tried to make sure that I am comparing my alternatives, such as selling off unused assets or reducing the size of the workforce to reduce capacity to increase capacity utilization, to cutting prices. All right, it's really important that the focus of the question is on cutting prices. I've talked a lot about cars, but I have said, for all businesses, any companies with a premium product, okay, that could be a premium product watch, etc. So hopefully the examiner will see that I'm trying to talk about any business. Maybe I could have made it a bit more explicit that I'm talking about more than just cars there. So my conclusion, a good conclusion will clearly answer the question. I believe that cutting prices may be appropriate for businesses that have price elastic demand for their product. I think maybe it might even be better to say maybe a good way, right? I've changed that because the question is it a good way? So let's just echo the question. In conclusion, I believe that cutting prices may be a good way for businesses that have price elastic demand for their product, as it should lead to an increase in sales and therefore capacity utilization. I think I would need to say a good way to increase capacity utilization. Sorry about this. That's probably a better way of phrasing it. Right, what have I done here? I've answered the question, is it a good way? And I've explained why. I've supported my answer. All right, it should be cutting prices could be a good way to increase capacity utilization if there's price elasticity, if there's price elastic demand, because it will lead to an increase in sales. But I need some balance in my conclusion. Right. So, however, such a strategy could be very damaging for luxury brands, as selling them at a reduced cost could damage their reputation. In such a situation, alternative solutions such as significant investment in R&D or advertising may be a better way to increase sales. So this is just a summary of my key arguments, basically. Cutting prices is a good way to increase capacity utilization, providing demand is price elastic, but if you've got a luxury brand, you need to think about an alternative because you're going to ruin your brand image. That's my main argument. Hopefully you can see how I've used the case study to answer the question about whether this is a good way for businesses to respond to an overall fall in capacity utilization.